The great whore of Babylon in Revelation, it is Jerusalem. And this video will prove it. One of the many mysterious symbols in the book of Revelation is an evil woman known as the Great Whore or the Great Harlot. We read of her in Revelation 17. This whore is described as being adorned in purple, scarlet and gold. She sits on a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and is drunk with the blood of saints and prophets. The book of Revelation states that this whore represents a certain city that would rule over the earth. This is mentioned in Revelation 17, verse 18. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. A lot of Christians assert that this whore and the city she represents is the Vatican City. Others have claimed that this city is New York. Yet others have said that it is Mecca in Saudi Arabia. The reality is that these claims are speculations and are simply not in line with what the Bible teaches. In this video, I will prove using the Bible that the great whore of Revelation is none other than Jerusalem. Yes. The great whore is not the Vatican. It is not New York. It is not Mecca. But Jerusalem. We begin by first building a profile of the whore of Babylon. 1. The whore is guilty of spilling the blood of saints. 2. She sits on 7 hills. 3. The whore is adorned in purple, scarlet and gold. 4. The whore is killed by her own lovers. In order to identify the whore of Revelation, we need to only pinpoint the city that matches all of these traits. It can be biblically proven that there is only one entity in the entire Bible that matches the whore's description. And that city is Jerusalem. First, the whore is guilty of spilling the blood of saints and holy men. Revelation tells us that the whore had spilled the blood of God's holy people, as well as those who bore testimony to Jesus. We see this in Revelation 17, verse 6. And in Revelation 18, verse 24. In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's holy people. Now, put your thinking caps on. Is there any city that was guilty of killing God's people? Jesus says that Jerusalem was guilty of killing God's people, that is, the prophets. Look to Matthew 23, verse 37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. What he means is that the people in charge of Jerusalem, that is, the Jewish spiritual leaders, were guilty of killing the prophets. In verse 31, Jesus accuses the Jewish spiritual leaders of his time that they were the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. And in verse 35, he says that the blood of righteous prophets are on the hands of the Jewish spiritual leaders. Another instance where Jesus spoke of Jerusalem killing prophets is in the parable of the tenants. There is no need to go into detail about it, but for your reference, this parable appears in 3 books of the New Testament, Matthew 21, Mark 12 and Luke 20. In the book of Acts, the Christian martyr, Stephen, who was stoned to death for being a follower of Jesus, also accused the Jewish spiritual leaders of being killers of the prophets. We read this in Acts 7. That Jerusalem, or rather, its people killed prophets is not just a New Testament teaching. Even in the Old Testament, Jerusalem is accused of killing prophets. For example, in Jeremiah 2, verse 30, God accuses the Jews of killing their prophets. And in Nehemiah 9, verse 26, the Jews are charged with killing their own prophets. So in both the New Testament and the Old Testament, Jerusalem is guilty of killing saints and prophets. What this means is that Jerusalem is the city that is guilty of having the blood of holy men. Jerusalem is guilty of the same exact crime that Revelation says the whore is guilty of. So putting 1 and 1 together, we can conclude that the great whore of Revelation is Jerusalem. This alone should be enough to establish the identity of the whore as Jerusalem. But, there is more to prove that the great whore of Revelation is none other than Jerusalem. Second, the whore sits on 7 hills. The whore sits on a beast with 7 heads. Revelation 17, verse 9 tells us that the 7 heads of the beast represent hills. We previously established that Jerusalem is guilty of having the blood of the prophets. But does Jerusalem sit on 7 hills? The answer is yes. Jerusalem makes the list of cities claimed to be built on 7 hills. You can look it up yourself. Since Jerusalem is built on 7 hills, this serves as a sound rebuttal to those who claim that Vatican or Mecca, or some other city is the great Hote of Revelation simply because they were built on 7 hills. Third, the whore is adorned in purple, scarlet and gold. Revelation tells us that the whore or the great city was dressed in purple and scarlet and was adorned with gold and precious things. We read this in Revelation 17, verse 4 and Revelation 18, verse 16. Is there an Old Testament connection? Yes. Jeremiah 4, verse 30 also addresses Jerusalem as a woman adorned in scarlet and gold. This is not a random coincidence. Because the second part of the passage mentions Jerusalem's lovers despising her and seeking to kill her. This perfectly mirrors the account of the great whore being despised and destroyed by her lovers, as we read in Revelation 17. We will go over this in a moment. Fourth, the whore is killed by her own lovers. Revelation tells us that the whore fornicated with the kings of the earth. We read this in Revelation 17, verse 2. We also read that the 10 horns on the beast that she sat upon were kings. And later, those 10 horns turn against the whore and utterly destroy her. We read this in Revelation 17, verses 16 and 17. Once again, these are themes taken directly from Old Testament verses admonishing Israel. First, the prophet Jeremiah portrays Jerusalem as being hated and destroyed by her lovers. In Jeremiah 4, that we looked at earlier, we read that Jerusalem's lovers despise her and seek her life. Jerusalem, who is addressed as daughter of Zion, laments that her life is given over to murderers. Jeremiah is not the only prophet whose writings were mirrored in Revelation. Ezekiel chapters 16 and 23, refers to Jerusalem as a prostitute, which is another word for whore. Ezekiel 23 is particularly interesting as it mentions specific details with regard to the punishment of the whore, that is, Jerusalem. Ezekiel's account of the whore's destruction closely resembles what we read about the whore's destruction in Revelation 17. I will display the verses next to each other. Notice the similarities. In Ezekiel 23, we read that the whore would be stripped of her clothes and jewelry. Compare that to Revelation 17. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. Ezekiel 23 tells us that God himself stirs up the whore's lovers to attack the whore. Compare that to Revelation 17. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose. Ezekiel tells us that the whore would be violently killed and burned with fire. Compare that to Revelation 17. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And, there's more. In addition to Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the author of Revelation has also used imagery from the book of Isaiah, specifically from chapter 47 that prophesied the destruction of the original Babylon. In Revelation we read, that Babylon, that is, Jerusalem, glorified herself, and was confident that her glory would not end, only to be destroyed suddenly. Compare this to Isaiah 47, which is about the destruction of Babylon. The exact same theme appears. Babylon enjoys luxury and security and claims she will never be a widow. And all of a sudden, disaster befalls her and she is destroyed. All these cannot be coincidences. The author of Revelation was telling us that Jerusalem is the new Babylon, the great city that is to be destroyed in the future. He is telling us that Jerusalem will be the Babylon of the end times. The author of Revelation simply used imagery spoken of by earlier prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Isaiah, to describe the fall of Jerusalem. Thus, to summarize, the whore is guilty of spilling the blood of saints and holy men. Both the Old and New Testaments tell us that Jerusalem is guilty of killing prophets. The whore sits on 7 hills. Jerusalem sits on 7 hills. The whore is adorned in purple, scarlet and gold. Jerusalem is described as being adorned in scarlet and gold. Jerusalem is also described as a prostitute. The whore is killed by her own lovers. Jeremiah and Ezekiel tell us Jerusalem was to be killed by her own lovers. we can establish with full certainty that the great whore in Revelation 17, and the great city that is destroyed in Revelation 18 is none other than Jerusalem. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share.